At exactly 3:15 a.m., something moved over West Africa, swift, silent, and deadly. Intelligence warned of a threat, but before it could strike, Vladimir Putin made the call. Russian forces activated a shield around Captain Ibrahim Traoré. What happened next was top secret. Until then, they thought he was just another African leader on a diplomatic trip. They were wrong. As jets streaked overhead and empires clenched their jaws, one man refused to bow. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't flying to Moscow for ceremonies. He was flying straight into history. In the silence above the clouds, the fate of continents changed, and a storm began with his name at its center. Read on for more truths they don't want you to hear, especially about Traoré. High above the earth, a silent battle was unfolding, one that would alter the balance of power between East and West. President Ibrahim Traoré's flight to Moscow, planned as a simple diplomatic mission, was suddenly intercepted by American and French fighter jets. But in the skies above, an unexpected ally arrived, risking a confrontation that could change history. What happens next will send shockwaves around the world. It was a calm morning in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The sun was shining brightly as President Ibrahim Traoré sat at his desk in the presidential palace, reviewing the final details of his upcoming trip. Dressed in his signature olive green uniform with the steely calm that had become his trademark, Traoré was more than a head of state. He was becoming a symbol. He had been invited by President Vladimir Putin to Moscow, where he would attend the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. The occasion would include a grand military parade in Red Square, a powerful symbol of Russia's strength and resilience. This was a big moment for Ibrahim. This was not just about attending a celebration. It was about making a bold statement to the world. Since taking office, he has worked tirelessly to restore Burkina Faso's sovereignty, removing his country from the influence of Western powers. His growing ties with Russia were seen by many as a move toward true independence, a challenge to the old imperial powers that had long controlled Africa's destiny. In the West, there was no hiding the growing anxiety. The United States and France, both nations with long-standing interests in Africa, had made clear their disapproval of Burkina Faso's growing alignment with Russia. In private meetings, American and French officials warned that any actions that threatened their influence in the region would not be tolerated. As Ibrahim prepared for his flight, he knew that this trip would not be just a diplomatic trip. It was a test, a challenge to the powers that had dominated Africa for so long. Would they allow him to come to Russia and participate in the event? Or would they do whatever it took to stop him from making this bold move? As the plane took off from Ouagadougou, Ibrahim knew the stakes were higher than ever. The crew was on high alert, knowing the flight could be aborted at any moment. As the Yagindia plane climbed higher, Ibrahim leaned back in his seat watching the vast African landscape disappear below. His expression remained unreadable, but beneath it lurked the determination of a man who had faced bullets, betrayal, and foreign subversion without wavering. He was heading into a new chapter for Burkina Faso. But as he would soon discover, the skies were about to become the scene of a dramatic showdown. Hours into the flight, everything seemed normal. Ibrahim's plane glided smoothly through the sky, the rhythmic hum of its engines drowning out the hushed murmur of the crew. However, as the plane crossed the Atlantic, a strange signal appeared on the radar. Two fast-moving dots were heading in the direction of their flight. The plane's crew tensed. They recognized the shapes on the radar immediately. Military jets moving fast and intercepting the path of Ibrahim's plane. These were no ordinary commercial aircraft. They were American and French fighters. At first, the pilots thought it might have been a mistake, but as the jets got closer, the situation became clear. It was an intercept. There had been no mistake. Ibrahim sat silently, squinting as he watched the jets approach. His mind raced. He had prepared himself for opposition. But this was unexpected. The radio crackled and a stern American military voice commanded, "This is unsafe airspace, restricted. You are ordered to land immediately. You are crossing into restricted airspace. I repeat, land immediately." Ibrahim leaned forward in his seat. His eyes narrowed. This was not just a misunderstanding. It was an act of defiance. The US and France were clearly trying to block his trip to Russia to keep him from attending the victory celebrations in Moscow. But Ibrahim Traoré was a coup d'etat had just been foiled in Burkina Faso. But what happened next shocked the world. Russian commandos fully armed and trained for elite operations landed in Burkina Faso. Their mission? One man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. It was not just protection, but a warning to the world. Russian special forces had landed in Burkina Faso, but not for war. Their mission was to protect President Ibrahim Traoré, who had just survived a deadly assassination plot. But why is Russia getting involved in this high-stakes drama? What threat do they see in common? While Traoré faces increasing danger from enemies, both foreign and domestic, Burkina Faso is on the brink of a political eruption. Let's unravel the story behind this explosive alliance. The recent defeat of a major coup attempt highlights the precariousness of the situation. Traoré has responded with a drastic measure, deploying Russian special forces to defend his regime and key government officials. The surprising move calls into question Burkina Faso's evolving geopolitical ties and the lengths to which Traoré will go to protect itself from external threats. There have been several attacks on Traoré's administration. The young leader has been dealing with a constant barrage of domestic and external pressure since taking office in September 2022. An already unstable security situation has been compounded by the country's transformation into a battleground for insurgent groups, many of whom operate in the Sahel region with considerable impunity. These organizations are targeting the government of Burkina Faso in an attempt to capitalize on the country's political turmoil in an effort to increase their influence in West Africa. The recent coup attempt was the latest in a series of attempts by local factions within the military and political elite to overthrow the government of Traoré. Traoré's power was particularly threatened by the failed coup in April 2025. According to reports, the presidential palace was to be stormed in a well-planned operation involving insurgent organizations and active and retired military personnel. This coup was part of a larger plan to overthrow the administration that Traoré had painstakingly built. And it was not just about seizing power. The details of the plot exposed a network of conspirators, some of whom were closely linked to foreign entities, who were vying for control of Burkina Faso's vital resources. While the revelation of the plot was shocking, it was only one of several failed attempts to overthrow Traoré. The government of Burkina Faso's Bay needs to act decisively in response to these persistent threats. Traoré understood the gravity of the situation and that protecting his leadership from internal and external threats was essential to his survival and, by extension, to the stability of Burkina Faso. The decision to deploy Russian commanders was not taken lightly, but it demonstrates the gravity of the situation and the speed with which he had to act. Protecting Traoré and ensuring the survival of his government was the main objective of sending these commandos, who are trained to handle high-risk security missions. A major change in the security environment in Burkina Faso is the deployment of Russian military personnel there. These special forces are not there merely for ceremonial protection. They play a significant role in protecting important government officials, reinforcing vital infrastructure and providing military expertise to local forces. Protecting Traoré and other senior government officials is the task assigned to the Russian commandos. Their presence is intended to prevent future assassination attempts on the president and to ensure that any military or political resistance is promptly met. Training the Burkina Faso armed forces is one of the main tasks of the Russian forces. To counter the growing threat from rebels and internal conspirators, Russian commandos are teaching sophisticated tactical knowledge, counterintelligence methods, and surveillance tactics. Russian commandos are helping to develop a more robust security apparatus capable of withstanding future challenges through close collaboration with the Burkina Faso armed forces. In addition to improving the capabilities of local forces, this training has strengthened Burkina Faso's relationship with the armed forces, with Russia. A shift in Burkina Faso's foreign policy is also signaled by the arrival of Russian troops. Traoré's choice to ally with Russia an increasingly powerful country in Africa, represents a significant shift from the country's previous dependence on Western assistance, especially from France. French troops have been deployed to Burkina Faso to fight the country. The country has been mired in insurgencies for years and has been involved in French-led counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel. But in recent years, relations between France and Burkina Faso have deteriorated with Traoré's invasion. He was not one to back down from a challenge, a former revolutionary with the heart of a lion and the poise of a chess grandmaster. He had never been one to bow down, even under threat. The pilots looked at each other, awaiting instructions. Ibrahim knew what had to be done. His country's sovereignty and the message it carried were too important to be threatened by foreign forces. He looked out the window and saw the American and French jets closing in, their positions intertwining around the plane. "I'm not landing," Ibrahim said quietly to the captain. "Stay on course. We're not deviating." The crew nodded, in understanding. They knew this was not just a flight, it was a declaration. But the stakes were high, the situation could escalate quickly. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, a new sound filled the air. The unmistakable roar of jet engines, this time coming from a different direction. A squadron of Russian fighters appeared on Ibrahim's radar, moving quickly to provide air support. The sight of them cutting through the clouds like blades was no coincidence. Russia had come not just to defend a diplomatic partner, but to honor a man who had refused to kneel. As the Russian jets closed in, Western forces were forced to reconsider their position. They had come to stop Traoré's flight, but now they were up against Russia, a country not easily intimidated. After hours of tense negotiations, American and French forces reluctantly withdrew. Their jets withdrew, pulling back from the airspace, leaving Ibrahim's plane to continue its journey toward Russia. The standoff was over, but the implications of what had just happened would reverberate for years to come. Ibrahim Traoré's flight to Russia had become a symbol of defiance, an undeniable statement that Burkina Faso would no longer be intimidated or bullied. With Russia's backing, Ibrahim had faced down the might of two Western superpowers and won. He did not need to fire a missile. His will alone was the weapon. As the plane moved smoothly through the sky again, Ibrahim sat back in his seat, his mind still racing. The danger had passed, but he knew the world was watching. The flight to Russia was more than just a diplomatic trip. It was a bold statement to the world. Burkina Faso was free and no one was going to stop it. The hours that followed the dramatic interception in the sky felt like an eternity to Ibrahim Traoré. His plane had been surrounded by American and French military jets, a show of force designed to prevent him from reaching Russia. The tension in the cabin was palpable, and every minute that passed seemed to bring them closer to an international incident. Despite the imminent threat, Ibrahim remained calm. He sat like a stone, unmoved, unbowed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His eyes remained focused on the horizon even as the Western jets closed in on his plane. The radio crackled again, breaking the silence. A cold, firm voice rang out, this time from the U.S. military command. "President Traoré, this is the United States Air Force. You are violating restricted airspace. You must divert your flight path immediately. Failure to comply will result in direct consequences." Ibrahim's eyes narrowed. He had expected some form of resistance, but this was far beyond what he had imagined. The Americans and the French were acting with unprecedented aggression, as if determined to stop him at all costs. The mission, which was supposed to be a peaceful diplomatic visit, was turning into a stalemate. His mind raced through his options. He could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. The whole world was watching now, though perhaps they did not yet know it. If he gave in, it would be a symbol of Africa's continued subjugation to foreign powers. But if he stood his ground, it would send a powerful message that would shake the foundations of global politics. "I will not land," Ibrahim said, his voice firm but resolute. "We are still on course. Do not deviate." There was no roar, no fury, just firmness. His words hovered in the air and the plane's commander nodded in agreement, already knowing what was at stake. The pilots and crew had been briefed on the importance of this flight and would now have to make it, regardless of the risk. The minutes passed like hours as Western jets flanked Ibrahim's plane. The air around them felt thick with anticipation. The situation had escalated. Any sudden move could trigger a confrontation between superpowers, but just as it seemed the tension would dissipate, a new voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the standoff like a bolt of lightning. "This is Russian Air Command. We have been instructed to escort President Traoré to his destination. Move your jets out of the way. Do not engage in combat." The tone of the Russian voice was dominant, and its arrival was as sudden as it was unexpected. The American and French jets hesitated, their pilots no doubt surprised by the sudden appearance of Russian fighters on their radars. In the skies above, the Russian jets were not just supporting an African leader. They were defending a man whose determination had already made him larger than life. They were sending a clear message to the Western powers. I repeat, the Russian voice continued, "President Traoré's plane is under our protection. We will not allow any interference with its flight." As the Russian jets moved into position, the Western planes retreated. The dynamic had changed completely. What had started as an aggressive move by the United States and France now seemed to be a dangerous game of brinkmanship that neither side wanted to escalate further. The Western forces, faced with the presence of Russian military might, found themselves with no option but to retreat. For a few more tense moments, the two sides stared at each other in the sky. But slowly, the American and French jets withdrew. The Russian planes held their ground, ensuring that Ibrahim's plane could continue its journey toward Russia. The standoff had ended without a single shot being fired, but the world had just witnessed a dramatic change. Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, had challenged Western power, and Russia's support had been the deciding factor. For the first time in decades, an African leader had dictated the pace of geopolitics from the cockpit of his U.S. sovereignty. For Ibrahim, this moment was more than just a flight to Moscow. It was a powerful message about Africa's place in the world, a defiant stand against imperialism that would echo far beyond the skies. As the plane resumed its flight path and the Russian jets maintained their protective formation, Ibrahim leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment to reflect. The worst was over, but the import of what had just happened weighed heavily on him. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission. It was a turning point for Burkina Faso and for all of Africa. Ibrahim's flight to Moscow had become more than just a trip. It was a powerful statement to the world. Africa would no longer be silenced. With Russia's support, Burkina Faso had sent a clear message. Sovereignty, freedom, and independence were non-negotiable. The journey continued, but the implications of this dramatic confrontation would be felt for years to come. As the plane headed for Moscow, Ibrahim knew the message had been sent loud and clear. Africa was no longer passive. It was taking its place in the world as a powerful and independent force. The world had just watched two superpowers face off in a single flight, and in the end it was Ibrahim Traoré, with Russia's support, who won. The hours that followed the dramatic interception seemed like an eternity. Ibrahim Traoré sat in his seat, still trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The American and French jets, initially a threat to his journey, retreated. The sky above, which had been a battleground between global powers, was now silent again. The only sound, the steady drone of the plane's engines. But the world had just witnessed an unprecedented moment. A leader from Burkina Faso, a small African nation, stood firm against two of the world's most powerful forces, with the support of Russia. As the plane flew smoothly toward Moscow, Ibrahim thought about what this would mean. He had been part of history. But this was not just a personal victory. It was a victory for Africa as a whole. If you felt Traoré's courage today, leave a comment below. The world needs to hear his voice. He proved that when African leaders stood firm, when they were backed by strong allies like Russia, they could challenge the long-standing imperialism that had held the continent in chains for centuries. The confrontation in the sky was more than a physical standoff. It was a symbolic moment, one that would inspire African leaders and citizens to the next, generations to come. The crew of Ibrahim's plane had done their job, guiding the plane through turbulent skies and ensuring that the president's message was clear. It had all started as a whisper, unconfirmed reports of unidentified aerial activity near Burkina Faso airspace in the early hours of the morning. Most would have dismissed it as routine surveillance. But it wasn't routine. At 3:15 a.m., a high-level threat was detected just beyond radar range, targeting a region closely linked to one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Sources now confirm this was no mere flyby. This was a potential strike, a calculated attempt to destabilize, distract, or even eliminate. And what stopped it was not a Western power. It was not the African Union. It was a phone call from Moscow. Minutes after the threat was flagged, Russian satellites pinpointed the intruder's coordinates. Intelligence teams tracked the source. And in a moment that now defines the deepening alliance between Burkina Faso and Russia, Vladimir Putin authorized an immediate defensive maneuver. Russian air defense systems stationed under a new secret security pact were activated, and fighter jets already circling the Sahel were deployed. They formed a strategic perimeter in the sky, not only to deter the threat, but to send a signal. Captain Traoré was not alone. This event, now quietly known as Operation 315, was not reported on the mainstream channels. There was no major announcement, no official press release. But insiders, military analysts, and high-level diplomats are talking, and what they are saying has the world on edge. Because this was not just protection, it was projection. The kind of defense typically reserved for superpowers was executed for a West African leader, not out of charity but out of alliance. Traoré's growing influence, his bold challenge to Western dominance, and his commitment to true African sovereignty have earned him powerful allies and dangerous enemies. What Putin did was not just strategic, it was symbolic. It showed the world that those who challenge Traoré are challenging more than a small landlocked nation. They are challenging a new axis of resistance that is forming across the global south. In Burkina Faso, news of the incident spread quickly, despite official silence. Citizens spoke in silence and awe. Social media was abuzz with phrases like Shield 315 and Heaven belongs to us now. Young people, once wary of outside threats, now speak with pride. Their president is not just surviving, he is protected. Meanwhile, intelligence circles in the West are reeling. Questions are swirling. Who authorized the original threat? Was it to test a warning or something far more sinister? And what will Russia's next move be? But amid all the speculation, one truth prevails. At 3:15 a.m., while most of the world slept, a new chapter of global power was written in the skies over West Africa. A chapter in which African sovereignty is no longer defended with borrowed words but with steel, satellites, and the will of those willing to support it.